I am, you guys hear me? Can you all hear me? I'm super excited about being with you guys today, talking a little bit about reverse culture shock, and really culture shock, just kind of in general. I don't know if you've ever been on a mission trip or if you've ever been a missionary, but anytime you're changing from one culture to another, you go through a little bit of this experience. Sometimes a little bit, sometimes a lot of the culture shock or reverse culture shock experience. I'm going through reverse culture shock today, actually. I found out this morning my daughter, who is 16, has her first job interview today. And so I'm going through a culture shock myself, just thinking about what it's going to be like to have a daughter who's working. And she doesn't have her license yet, so we're going to be driving her back and forth. And I hadn't really put all these pieces together in my mind, you know, how difficult that's going to be. This morning she asked me some things about getting a new job, and Dad, how should I talk to him in the interview? You know, and as I'm sitting there thinking about it, I just think about the transition that I'm going through. I don't know about you guys, but transitions are pretty common in life. There was a transition you went through when you came here to SIBI, to AIM. There's transitions that you're going to go through as you transition out of this place to your next work. And there's going to be transitions when you come home. And specifically today, we're going to talk about the transition of coming home. Now, I have a microphone here, and I'm not afraid to use it. Right? I'm going to walk around with this in just a second, and what I want to do is I just want to kind of get your feedback. If you guys have ever been in a situation of culture shock, specifically we want to start with culture shock, I just kind of want to know, what are the emotions, what are the feelings that you had going through culture shock? Just out of curiosity, who here has ever gone on a long-term mission trip or been a missionary? If you'd like to raise your hand, or even if you transitioned because you're from another culture, that works too. And so what we want to do for just a second is I want to just ask you guys a question of what kind of emotions did you feel going through that transition? So I'm just going to walk around. Who wants to kind of let me know what emotions you felt going through transition? Don't be shy. I'm going to look dumb if I'm... Yes, that's good. Good. What emotions?
I think one of the first ones was loss and grief over the people that are left behind and not being able to be with them, as well as experiencing some loneliness.
Good. Very good. Ron, do you have one?
Yeah. Anger. Just anger I'd never experienced to that degree before.
Good. Anybody else? What emotions did you feel when you're going through culture shock? Got some guys back here.
Doubt. Did we make the right decision? Is this the thing we should be doing? So just doubting that decision.
Okay. Corey, do you want to say? I was going to say doubt. Oh, he's going to say doubt. Wonderful.
I'd say regret. Like, feel like I shouldn't have come back. I was doing better work where I was.
Okay. And we're specifically talking about going someplace new. So going there. Very good.
Confession from things I used to do and I stopped doing here in the States.
Okay. Very good. And so you guys have experienced culture shock. Now, here's the question. When you came back, was it harder coming back than it was going? That's the question. So if you think it was harder coming back than going, I want you to raise your hand. I want you to tell me why. Why do you think it was harder? And everybody's going to raise their hand now. We'll start with Corey since I saw him first, and then I'll move to Paula, and then I'll head back that way.
I think it was harder because most of the people that I was interacting with in the States were thinking, oh, this is just the same old Corey. And I had changed, and they were expecting the old Corey.
Yeah, isn't it interesting? You change, and they change as well. There's change on both sides. And sometimes neither one of us are willing to acknowledge or recognize that. That's good. Paul, did you have something?
Yeah, I felt extremely effective and significant. I could see results for what I did there when I left. And then when I came here, I felt like I was treading water.
Very good. A question of significance, a question of purpose. Very good. Who else? If you felt more difficulty returning than going. Okay, Ben?
Yeah, I felt a lot more of just a lot of confusion and anger for no reason. Just, why am I so angry?
Okay, good. Confusion and anger for no reason. I think that's significant. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. Ron?
Well, one of the things I found, somebody touched on it just briefly, is that you kind of expect to come back and you remember all the fond things and the things you were, and back home has changed.
That's exactly right.
And so, like, wow, now I'm really feeling lost.
It's so true. And you know, one of the things that happens is we don't acknowledge, we don't see why. We can't see why we feel that way. That's exactly right. And Ben, you had raised your hand. Are you willing to do it? I know I kind of snuck up on you here.
I kind of felt like I was lost as well. Kind of had friends and family that had become my family while there, and came home, and it was just like that whole system was gone. I didn't really know.
Yeah, I like that wording that he used there. The system was gone. Well, guys, returning home is one of the most difficult things, and there's probably a number of reasons for that. For one thing, when you go, you're anticipating the shock. I'm anticipating it's going to be shocking for my daughter to get a job and me to have to run around and deal with that. I'm anticipating the shock of her leaving and going to AIM or going to college. I'm anticipating that. But if she ever decides she wants to move back in the house, we're going to have problems, right? Because I'm not anticipating that. In fact, there's a part of me that will think, foolishly, wow, how neat would that be? You know what I'm saying? How neat would it be for her to come back and move into the house? And I'm not anticipating that shock. And I think a lot of that's what happens whenever we go to the mission field, or we go and jump into a ministry, we go and work in a ministry, and then we come back. We're not anticipating the shock that's to come. It's interesting to me that the Bible deals with this, and it really does. And I want to take a look at a few stories, a couple of scenarios where the Bible talks about returning home and how difficult that is, and just some of the challenges. This week is reentry week for AIM. We've got some students coming off the mission field. They've been there for a year and a half. They're coming back off the mission field, and this is a difficult time. They used to talk about the stair. Pat, what's the distance? I always forget the distance of the stair when they come off the field. What's 1,000-yard stare? Yeah, the 1,000-yard stare. You guys have heard this, where you have a missionary coming off the field and they just gazing off into the future. You know, you're going, what's going on? And it's just this difficulty to connect. I remember talking to Dottie Schultz, Doris Schultz in Dallas. She works as a counselor with students, and she told a story about walking up to someone at church on a Sunday, seeing this girl in the back of the room and saying, do you have difficulty connecting with others? And the girl said, yes. She said, do you feel like you don't fit in anywhere? She said, yeah, I do. She said, really struggling with your purpose? She said, yeah. She said, are you a returning missionary? And the girl said, yes, how did you know me? You know, how did you, it's almost like Jesus, when Jesus is talking to Nathaniel, how do you know me? And the answer is, well, I've seen you. I saw you under the tree there. And that's the message, is that these things are pretty normal. And I want to kind of convey that to you, that it's pretty normal. And this week, as you see the Aimers coming back, you're going to see a lot of maybe long faces. You're going to see a lot of empty stares. And you might even have some conversations, and you'll go, man, that's strange. Whenever I came off the mission field, one of the first response my parents had for me was, man, you haven't changed at all. In fact, you've digressed. You've digressed. And I think the message there is this. Sometimes when we come off the mission field, sometimes when we return from the ministry, from the work, it takes its toll on people. It really does. And so today, as we talk about this, I'm not just saying this for Aimers preparing to go, or Aimers who are just coming back. You know, we could say, here's the face of reverse culture shock right here, and just everybody look at Abby, right? We don't want to do that. But here's the reality, is that this is not just for Abby, and this is not just for Aimers. This is for anybody who's ever gone and done ministry and who plans on coming back home at some point. Okay? And so this idea, and we're going to play on this idea, the time to return and to rebuild, and this is coming out of the book of Ezra. Out of the book of Ezra, it's coming back out of captivity. It's returning to the homeland. And it talks about this in chapter 3, that after 2 years, they begin the process of rebuilding. And it says they sang responsively, praising and giving thanks to the Lord, for he is good, and his steadfast love endures forever towards Israel. That's verse 11. And all the people shouted with great shouts, and they praised the Lord because of the foundation of the house of the Lord that was laid. But many of the priests and the Levites and the heads of their fathers' houses, old men who had seen the first house, wept with a loud voice when they saw the foundation of the house being laid, though many shouted aloud for joy. so that the people could not distinguish the sound of joyful shout and the sound of the people's weeping. For the people shouted with great shouts, and the sound was heard from far away. You would think that the older, more mature, wiser would be the ones who'd be steadfast and firm and able to handle this. But it's them, it's those very ones who have the most emotion in the story, isn't it? It's kind of interesting. The wiser have the most emotion. Why is that? And it's really fascinating to me. So many times in the Bible we see this over and over and over again, where the characters that you don't expect to be the emotional ones are the emotional ones. The ones that you don't expect to be asking the questions and having the doubts are the ones who have the doubts. I think about John the Baptist as he's in prison, and he's the one asking the questions. I think about the apostles as they're in the boat. You know, in John chapter 1, they're willing to confess Jesus and all of his glory, but by the time they're in the boat, they're asking the question, who is this man? They're in great fear. And now here we have this story, and it's the older men who are looking and they're thinking about the past, and they're thinking, and it brings deep sadness to them. I want you to know that in those times of rebuilding and returning home, and it's super important that when we return home, we rebuild, super important. But I also want to say this, that's also going to be a time of great emotion. It's going to be a time of great emotion, and that's healthy, and that's normal. And I want you to know that, because I think it's important to say that. Our foundation for our faith is not based on subjectivism. It's not based on our emotion, but be sure of this, emotion will still happen. Emotion will still happen. And I think that's the key. I think that's the key is, regardless of what the emotion is, we still remain firm in our faith. So emotion is going to happen. Well, we see this again. I want to show you another story of this. It's found in the book of Genesis. The story of Joseph, whenever Joseph reconnects with his brothers. It's a little bit different, kind of reverse culture shock story, because he's not coming back home, but it's the first time in a while that he has seen them. And I love the story because there's so many little nuggets of culture in the story. Remember, there's a part of the story where he's talking in Egyptian, and they can't understand it. There's different parts of the story where it talks about some of the Egyptian culture, some of their gods, and some of their culture there, and how the two cultures are kind of combining and they're kind of hitting. But as the story unfolds, we see Joseph here, and Joseph is connecting with his family. And they have that first reveal where Joseph begins to connect to them. And I want you to hear this passage in Genesis chapter 45. Then Joseph fell upon his brother Benjamin's neck, and he wept. And Benjamin wept upon his neck, and he kissed all of his brothers and wept upon them. And after this, the brothers talked with him. That's so interesting. It kind of reminds me of that passage in Ezra. There was such great weeping, and there was such great joy and laughter. How do you reconcile those two emotions? Laughter and weeping and joy and these coming together. And here we have this story of weeping, but also talking and reunion. And how do you reconcile those emotions? And the answer is you really don't. But you do this. You know that when people return home, there's going to be a lot of emotion. There's going to be a lot of emotion. And yet I want you to see this in the story, that God is still their God. That they are still consistently in that relationship with God. Nothing changes in that. I want to say this to you. Returning home is not just a time to return and rebuild. It's not just a time to return and rebuild. It's also a time for raw reactions. It's also time for raw reactions. And once again, the key to this is not to say having raw emotion it's not wrong. What's wrong is when we leave our foundation morals, and the foundation truths that we hold to. There's one more interesting story. It's found in the book of Mark, chapter 6. It's when Jesus returns home. And as Jesus is there and he's talking to the crowds, he's talking at the synagogue and preaching, it says he marveled at them for their lack of faith. He marveled at them. That word marveled is the same word that we find in the book of Matthew for the apostles when they're in the boat and they're asking the question, who is this man? Who is this man that even the wind and the waves obey him. Other versions of the Bible, other translations will say astonished or shocked. I don't know that it was necessarily shock. I don't know. But I get this sense that Jesus is standing there going, I can't believe this. He's just marveling at it. Why is that? Because returning home is raw. It's emotional. It's difficult. So what do you say? What do you say to those who are going through the return and the rebuilding and the raw reactions of reverse culture shock? If you see somebody in the hall this week and they come back and they look like they have gone through that process, or you see them in tears, or whatever you see, it might be tendency for us to want to squash that, or want to say, hey, don't do that. Don't do that. I was at Walmart a couple of years ago. It was so funny. I was standing there at Walmart, and I walked in, and there's this guy standing there with no shoes on in Walmart, and he's just standing there. And I'm kind of standing from a distance, and I'm looking at him, and I'm like, that's strange. That's just strange. And he starts to walk off, and as he's walking off, I'm like, I know that guy. I know that guy without shoes on in Walmart. So I start chasing after him. And I walk around, and guess what? He's wearing an AIM shirt. He just got off the field from Africa. He had just got off the field from Africa just the day before, and he's standing in Walmart with no shoes on. And I think I even took a picture, by the way, and I should have brought it. I didn't bring it, but I took a picture. Because I said, this is the face of reverse culture shock right here. I mean, this is it. But as I did that, there's so many tendencies in my mind. I want to say, that's not right, right? Of course he knows it's not right. He knows it's not right to walk into Walmart without your shoes on, Or I want to say something to challenge him, or to push him, or whatever. Guys, he's coming off the mission field, and he's been pushed. He's been pushed. The message here is, what can we give them? What can you give these guys when they're coming back? Well, I think it's interesting in Isaiah chapter 39. I think this issue may be addressed in 39 and 40. In 39, there's talking about Babylonian captivity. The Israelites are going to go into captivity, and it's going to be rough. It's going to be hard. Babylonian captivity is not going to be easy, and you guys know the culture shock that's going to happen. When they go in there, Daniel and those guys, they're not going to be able to eat the food. And they're going to have to deal with a lot of battles and a lot of conflicts, and you guys know these stories. But in Isaiah chapter 40, it comes back. And maybe a little gift that Richard Rogers gave to me before his passing is in Isaiah chapter 40, verse 29, when he says, God gives power to the faint, and to him who has no might he increases strength. Even youths shall faint and be weary, and young men shall fall exhausted. But they who wait on the Lord shall renew their strength. They shall mount up with wings like eagles. They shall run and not be weary. They shall walk and not faint. And here's what Richard pointed out. He said, you know what? Isn't it strange that the verse is in reverse? You ever notice that? The verse is in reverse. It should say this. I mean, just logic, progression. They walk, and then they run, and then they fly. Isn't that how life works? We walk, and then we run, and then we fly. And Richard said, isn't it interesting that this verse says they fly, and then they run, and then they walk? And as I was looking at it in those eyes and that light, he made the comment, coming out of Babylonian captivity, what would it be like? Coming home and singing, man, you're soaring, you're so excited, man, I'm coming home. Everything's great, I'm coming home. And then, can't fly anymore. I got to run, and I'm running as fast as I can. I'm running as fast as I can, and ultimately, I just got to walk because I'm so tired. I've been on this long journey, and it's been such a difficult time, and I'm walking. And here's the famous line that sticks with me that Richard said. He said, nowhere in the Bible have we ever been commanded to fly for God. But you are commanded to walk in the light as he is in the light. I want to challenge you this week. If you see somebody coming home and they're having difficulty, be proud of them. Be happy for them and encourage them to keep walking. Keep walking. Keep walking in the light. And if you come home, if you're going through transition right now and it's difficult and you're feeling like, man, I'm tired and I'm weary and what do I have? I want to encourage you. Keep walking. Keep walking. You've not been commanded to fly. You've been commanded to walk in the light as he is in the light. Let's pray together. Father God, we come before you today, and we ask that you would bless us. We ask that you would bless us. Sometimes we're going to fly, and Father, we're excited about that. There's going to be times in our youth